Snow did not dampen what was happening down at Stampede Park, specifically the BMO Center. The federal Conservatives holding their national convention in Calgary this weekend. They tried to avoid talking about the Senate expense scandal, the handling of the situation, causing lots of controversy. That's where Laurie Williams comes in. Laurie is a political scientist with Mount Royal University. Thank you for coming in. I've been really excited about chatting and picking your brain about what's happening. First of all, what's your general take as to what transpired this weekend?
Well, I think it was a very interesting thing to watch all of the expectations of what was going to happen and how something rather different was delivered. So Stephen Harper didn't, but for a few moments, even address the Senate scandal. He tried to focus on his record and what the future was going to hold, tried to sort of get attention away from what's been dogging him for some time and focus it on what the party faithful wanted to hear. And certainly that was what the convention wanted to hear. Whether that's what Canadians more broadly wanted to hear is another question.
Yeah, no kidding. And yeah, we saw the Prime Minister during his keynote address just kind of, it was like I was chatting with you during Andy's forecast. He's looking 5 steps ahead, like, oh yeah, we'll move past this. We got to look toward the next election, essentially, right? And
that's exactly what it sounded like, a campaign speech. It sounded like that's exactly what he was looking for is the next election. But in order to win the next election, he's got to win over a number of the people who voted for him last time on the promise of increased transparency, accountability, responsibility, and all that sort of stuff. We haven't seen a lot of that. In the recent Nanos poll, about 53% of Canadians do not see him as credible on this Senate issue. Now, those are people who are thinking about where to put their vote. So there's a lot of work to be done between now and the next election if he's going to actually retain or even grow his majority.
do you think this issue is dividing the party a bit? We're seeing it in the Senate, right? Because some Conservatives are saying, I may need to vote against my government.
And some have been quite vocal about it. When it was sort of not officially, if you like, a government motion, it looked like a lot of people were willing to vote against it. It'll be interesting to see what happens because there are a lot of people who are raising very significant and credible questions about about whether this is the way to handle the expense scandal. And some of them are suggesting that they don't want to vote along party lines. They want to vote according to principle. So we see within the Senate there's a bit of resistance to what is previously been the very strong control by the Prime Minister. We're also seeing a couple of cabinet ministers sort of coming out and questioning whether the portrayal of Nigel Wright is quite accurate. What that signifies at this stage is hard to know, because again, we're talking about somebody who, two cabinet ministers who are potentially contenders for the leadership down the road, and perhaps they're looking more to their careers than to the Prime Minister's future, or maybe to the party on a long-term basis. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I think we're at the stage yet where we're seeing a coup in the works, but we're seeing much more dissension than we normally see within the Conservative Party, and that's causing people to pay attention.
Yeah, no kidding. And Nigel Wright, in case you don't know at home, the former Chief of Staff for Prime Minister Harper, and 11 votes. That's if everyone shows up for the Senate vote that may be happening tomorrow. That's the earliest. 11 votes need to vote against their government, right? Need to go against that to happen. I'm wondering if this played a part in it. Prime Minister Harper played the piano at Cowboys when they had kind of a whoop-up after the day's business. Played, I think, 5 or 6 songs as part of his set. Is this the Prime Minister also trying to show that he's not even worried about the expense scandal?
Certainly that's part of it, and I think the fact that the original playing a piano sort of portrayed him as a regular guy, not quite so...
He played the Beatles, didn't he?
He's you know, sort of a regular, not too scary, a little more homey family, you know, the sort of fellow that you can relate to.
A more likable guy.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's part of what he's trying to do is convey that. And on the heels of that very tough speech probably was a good moderating influence. But again, there are a lot of people with questions, and those questions are not currently being addressed. I think down the road, this is going to be something that, as much as he'd like to see it go away, the Prime Minister is going to have to address. I mean, after all, he is officially accountable and responsible to Parliament and ultimately to us for what's happened there. And he's going to continue to get questions until the answers that Canadians are looking for are provided satisfactorily.
I think a lot of people might have been looking for an apology, right? Because he appointed Pamela Wallin, Mike Duffy, Patrick Brazeau, Nigel Wright was a guy he hired as his Chief of Staff.
Well, whether an apology or just taking responsibility and saying, okay, mistakes were made, we're going to make sure that we're not going to do this again, or there's a problem and we're going to address it in the future. That whole idea of responsibility, many people have been commenting that taking a page out of Ralph Klein's book might have been a good thing to do here. It's certainly not Stephen Harper's style, but the idea that politicians are willing to take responsibility for what they have done and promising to make things better in the future seems to be something that generally plays quite well. Not many politicians do it, not many are good at it, but certainly it's something that some people were hoping would happen at the convention, including including members of the party, people who were speaking sort of behind the scenes, were hoping that he would address his own lack of judgment, the discrepancies in the story that have happened over time. That there was one sort of set of explanations that occurred originally, and that's changed a couple of times.
Yes.
Again, this is what's hurting the credibility. You want people to trust you. You've got to be willing to face up to what it is that they have questions about, and that just hasn't happened yet.
All right, there we go. Lori Williams, political scientist at Mount Royal University. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
My pleasure.
Great topic to discuss. Maybe we'll bring you back in a couple of weeks, see what shakes down.
Happy